All right, welcome back. We are looking at the Crescent Nebula, and in the previous episode, I went ahead and did some pre-processing, stretched it out, got it to the. Now we're basically finishing touches onto this. So I'm again just being transparent, sharing my process, open back for any tips, techniques, or tricks. First thing I like to do when I have this image is I have to be careful because some of this that looks like noise is actually faint nebulosity. If we go back to our reference image, see there's a lot of nebulosity around it. So we don't want to get rid of that nebulosity, but we do want to increase the contrast. What I'm going to do is select my luminance mask, and I always view the mask to make sure it's doing what I want it to do. Detect the nebula and stars. Because what I'm going to do is just very subtly reduce the luminance of the background. Let's do this. Let's click on the preview. And there's a trick to figuring out the right point to do. If I click on a star, I'm actually clicking preview. If I click on a star, I see channels really high up. If I click on the nebula, I'm in the middle. Then if I click on background, so it's basically this point, background was the nebula, stars were way up here. I'm gonna drop a point about midway and just pull down this portion. And we'll look at our real time. And here, let me pull it up. So it should just be subtly darkening background. And we don't want anything too major. We're not trying to artificially stretch this far. We're just increasing the contrast. I'm going to nudge it like that. Then I'm going to do the opposite, which is bring up the contrast of the main luminous part. So to do that, I do Control-Shift-I and reverse it. So now actually that's how I had it before. So now these are highlighted. I'm going to reset filter, preview. I'm just going to go ahead and anchor here. And this whole curve, I'm fine. And what we should see, flip between previews, is just the whole detail of the image becomes a little bit brighter. Again, just small little increments. In fact, if we apply this, see the effect if we double applied it, which I'm. Now I want to get to work on the nebula itself without necessarily doing much with the stars. So how I do that is, if you'll recall, we created this, and although this mask is starting point, I'm actually going to use my curves to manipulate this mask as well, so I get this. Let's find kind of our areas that we're interested in, areas we're not. Similar story, not like that. Preview this. Going to pull this out while increasing the little bit of an odd shaped curve. We can I'm really upping the contrast to protect the nebula itself. Then what I can do, I can make small adjustments to the nebula. Let's go ahead and apply that mask. And you can see it's hitting some of those bright stars, which if they become a problem, stamp those out. In fact, go ahead and proactively. I don't want the stars necessarily coming along for the ride. So what we're going to do to nebula, we're going to use the clone stamp. The way this works, we set a radius. I can kind of guesstimate if here I'm at 528. If I look here at 53486, I'm gonna guess. Then we control click on a dark region. That gives us a circle that we can use to wipe over the bright region. I'm gonna keep repeating that. I don't need to wipe out the entire background. Stars that kind of fell through the little micro adjustments. I have to be careful about the star because to not protect the areas of the nebula that are close to it. What I'm going to do is the softness, reduce the opacity, just do a much softer wipe of the stars. So I'm just going to, they appear like small holes. Okay, so be sure to remember to click the checkbox. Now we can come back here, verify we're protected the way we want to be. And the first thing I think I'll do is really bring out the red. So I'm going to use this color saturation tool. I'm going to again use the preview to see real time. I want to focus on this red and yellow segment. So I'm going to put some points around the other colors to prevent them from moving with everything. Then I'm going to take this, slowly increase it. And as you can see, that saturation is pretty subtle, not sure how well it's showing up. And I don't want extreme changes that look artificial, but slight iterative. We're going to apply that, then close a real-time preview. The other capability that we have available to bring out some of this detail was captured well, but I think more. So I'm going to do this preview. And so we're looking at a segment nebulosity. Actually, let me or the nebula. So you can use this arrow to adjust your preview panel. The two tools that I like to use at this stage are localized histogram transformation and HDR, which I'll get to. So the localized is basically going to adjust the contrast based on algorithm structure that you're focused on. So with the default values flipping between, you can see it's bringing out a lot more detail. You have to be careful because it can quickly look almost artificial. But what I want to do is see what happens if I increase. So it's taking into account more signal. And if I get a better image or if the image degrades. We'll let that run, and this preview happens to be a pretty large segment. We've got better result. Yeah, it's bringing in more detail. We can also play with the amount. So we don't want to do 100%. If I do a 1, it's going to become very, say, almost plastic or computer generated. So we take this and we'll put it. I actually like it onto process. And remember, if we apply here, it's going to apply to the kind of experience. So we need to go from our preview full image, then we can apply. And see if we can bring this over, progress. Its way along. And then the next thing we're going to do is the HDR transformation, which well, I'll go ahead and pull it up. I'm drawing a blank, not because I don't use the tool pretty much every process. And the other thing to keep in mind is maybe concerned about some of the noise that in the image. Remember that I dithered this, so it's about 3 times the natural resolution. So to address that, once I'm done processing, put down double the original size, and that itself will get rid of some through the averaging out when we compress the image. That looks like as we process this. Getting so close. That's the one thing with live streaming, I can't exactly fast forward on the process, but most of these run. And it's done. I'll move this out of the way so we've just got more on the nebula. HDR I may or may not use. It's a multi-scale transformation. There's papers written on how it works, but it essentially enhances detail, draws out detail, but like other too much. So I usually start at the default. Take a look at that and flip between versions. So this one actually darkened my image quite a bit. Didn't really appear to draw. We can go 2 layers down, less structure, see what that looks like. That one was a lot more subtle. And we can always go what happens here. It's actually brightened. I like the slightly brighter image. Brings out more detail and contrast. By that image wide. This fortunately is one of the functions that a little more quickly. Okay, and now really all that's left to do is decide what I want to do with the background and the stars. What do I mean by that? Well, if we look at the stars, these big ones aren't going to be affected, but these are actually, there is the option if I want to bring back my star mass. Make sure our stars are what's being affected. So we could sharpen them a little bit more. Sharpen tool. I think it's probably going to be overkill. Go ahead, run a preview, see what it looks like. Sharpening. So take a look at this or flip back and forth. So 4, 4. So this really sharpens the stars without it. So I do like the effect of that. So I'm going to go ahead, broader image. And last but not least, I want to work on that background. And the luminance is not going to do much for me because scale across the entire image. I really want to isolate the nebula and stars and keep those fixed while I bring the background down a little. So I'm going to use pixel math, to create a new mask. And the mask is going to be basically a combination of the nebula star mask. I like to call this my magic mask. This is so helpful in what it does. So I'm going to create new image, call it magic mask. Here you can see nebula and stars. So I'm going to pick that mask. And we'll do two things. First thing is we'll protect everything but the background. We'll go into our curves and we'll draw the background. Start down here, slowly pull it to the point where we still have that faint luminosity, really a nuanced process. In fact, I'm actually moving it over to my more detailed monitor for a second. I want to down, touch. I'll bring it back. So this to me looks pretty good. Go ahead and apply that. Then I'm going to invert that mask. See if we want to brighten or adjust saturation of the main feature. So this would brighten it if I go to brighten it a little. Then I'm going to go to saturation and touch more saturation. Not exaggerated like that. Light. And go ahead and apply that. And as I mentioned, the very last step, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to remove the mask. I'm going to save this image as is. Got a folder that I keep kind of my final state. 463 processed size, and I save it as an XIF file, that data in it. Now I'm going to go to process, resample. I'm going to grab this view. I'm going to resample it to So we'll go ahead and apply that. And it gives me a warning that we're going to the image solution that we did in. Now it's been resampled. Scale it back. And that to me is a nice end product. So go ahead and save. Call it scaled. And I'm going to call that a wrap. Thank you so much for joining me through this process. Please leave your comments, feedback, thoughts, suggestions, and questions